and a faculty member of the McLean Center for Clinical Medical Ethics and Divinity School at the University of Chicago. Dr. Padela holds an MD from Weill Cornell Medical College. He completed his residency in emergency medicine at the University of Rochester and received a master's in healthcare research from the University of Michigan. Prior to that, he received his bachelor's degrees in biomedical engineering and classical Arabic and literature from the University of Rochester. His Islamic studies expertise comes from part-time seminary studies during secondary school and tutorials with traditionally trained Islamic authorities. Dr. Padela is a clinical researcher with scholarly foci at the intersections of healthcare, bioethics, and religion. His scholarship aims at improving health and healthcare through better accommodating religious values in healthcare delivery. Using Muslim Americans and Islam as a model, he studies how religion impacts patient healthcare behaviors and healthcare experiences. He also studies how it informs the professional identities and workplace experiences of clinicians and furnishes bioethical guidance to patients, providers, policymakers, and religious leaders. This knowledge is subsequently mobilized towards educational and policy interventions. His current projects span behaviors related to cancer screening, organ donation, end-of-life care, and are at the intersection of religion and science. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Aasim Padela.
Thank you, Omar. I was going to come up and save you, actually.
Yeah.
But thank you for that introduction. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to be here at this institution, which I'm visiting for the first time. And this is actually a great room. I wish there were people up there so they could throw stuff at us. But really, it's a pleasure to be here. Hopefully, I'll entertain you with some thoughts this evening. So let's see. Right. So what Omar was sort of trying to say a little bit, and I want to share with you the lens with which I want to talk today, is that most of my work has to do with this intersection between the Islamic tradition, biomedicine, and Muslim practices. And I come trying to bring voice to various groups, right? So for example, we research how, as you mentioned, Islam impacts patient decisions and healthcare behaviors, right? So trying to give voice to the research I do to Muslim patient experiences. We think about how Islam, right, that tradition influences the bioethical attitudes of physicians and their workplace experiences. Again, in this case, trying to give voice to the experiences of physicians who come from a Muslim background. And then lastly, thinking about how Islam furnishes moral guidance, or really the people who are the inheritors of Islam or the standard bearers of the tradition, give and deliver moral guidance from the roots of the tradition around biomedicine. So that's the sort of work that I do. And today in the talk, you'll see in some of my commentary, and most definitely in the Q&A, I want to try to rely on data. Because I try not to speak from my own perspective, but rather give you data that you can think about. Because I think all of us are sort of have our own shtick of how to do things, but when you have data in front of you, you have to think about how to interpret it in a certain way. So in any case, today we're talking about GenEthics, right? GenEthics, not GenEthics. GenEthics and Islam. And we're going to start a little bit with some history for a moment, right? Where we are in the moment today in 2019. So early in the 1990s, there was this Human Genome Project. You might not know about that, but I think some of you might. In any case, it was led by these two competing visions, or these competing industrial complexes. One was a private enterprise, Craig Venter, and the other was Francis Collins from NIH. So you saw this was this competition between the industry and the government who would map the human genome. And so when I was thinking about going to college, this was in everybody's minds. And in my first year in college at the University of Rochester, in September of the first year that I was there, this guy came and gave a lecture in a bigger hall than this, and I was amazed. Wow, right? Does anybody know who this person is? So this is Ian Woolman, right? And he was the father of Dolly. And Dolly was the first cloned sheep, right? So we were trying to think about the human genome, but he had actually genetically engineered a sheep. And he tried many times. This is one of several that ended up surviving. And Dolly just died, I think, a couple years ago. But he came and astounded us with this feat, this marvel of science and medicine, that we can now clone a mammal. later on, so I had gone through undergrad and I was in medical school, and then the Human Genome Project completed. And Bill Clinton was president at that time. There you see Craig Venter and Sir Francis Collins, and he says this astounding things, right? And one of them is this quote: that the entire human genome, without a doubt, is the most important, most wondrous map ever produced by humankind. So it's an astounding moment for all of us, right? That in just a decade, a little over a decade, we could now map the human genome, and we were going to herald a new era, right, for medicine. Well, what was that promise? So in 2020, we were thinking about, okay, we can now develop treatments that would be tailored to the individuals. The idea was called personalized medicine, precision medicine. So basically the idea would be, right, that you would take someone's human genome and see what sort of, take their genetic, sort of the DNA, and try to understand, well, what are the markers here of their DNA? And then you would say, let me take it in the lab, try these 3 cancer medicines, and tailor that medical regimen to that person. So personalized medicine, right? That we're going to unlock the secrets of the human genome, but by doing so, we're also going to be able to now tailor medications. This was then applied at a population level. So we had the human genome, but maybe there's a difference between the human genome and the Qatari genome and the Saudi genome, because many countries started developing their own sort of population-based genomics. And the idea truly is this, and you'll know in medicine, that we have certain models of the human being, right? 100 years ago, we were talking about the white male as a model, right? And we were doing all our research on the white male. And then now I've thought about trying to involve women in research and other racial identities, right? So the same thing here in the human genome. The genome that we classified, yes, 99% is the same, as everybody shares that, but some is different. And we know in populations like Saudis and Qataris, there are certain diseases that affect those populations, just like, about Ashkenazi Jews. So in any case, Qatar got involved in the game late in the 2010s, 2009 I think. They were thinking about this, and now they wanted to use their entire population as a data bank. And so they developed the Qatari Genome Project. The idea was that heralded the omics revolution, what we call in medicine. Where now we're going to not just do one drug, right, for one person, but on a whole sample you can see, well, this type of blood pressure medicine works for our population. So we're going to invest in that type of blood pressure medicine, not others. So develop at a population level, tailored medication. And this all started with what? The Human Genome Project. So moving forward, right now we're in our decade here. You can imagine that people were very excited about all this medicine happening, all this technological advancement, but the people who were holding us back were ethicists, right? They never get to do anything because they're thinking about the ethics. And it's true. What you had was these 2 camps. People feeling that there's a lot of promise, right? We should do a lot of work in genetics and genomics. And another camp, well, we should hold back for a second, right? Things can happen when you have this sort of information. We should pause for a moment, right? Have a cautionary principle to the way we approach these sorts of things. So ethicists were involved actually from the start, because the Human Genome Project had a companion ELSI project. That there were researchers who were paid by NIH to think about the ethical, legal, and social implications of this research, what it meant. And I think that actually was a huge sort of insight that Francis Collins had. That we can do the science of being people who are professionalized in bioethics actually to think about how we're going to apply this. Because we need to think about these issues prior to them becoming open in the public domain. So they were thinking about exotic things like human chimeras, right? What happens when you want to create a model from a pig that will develop insulin that can be used in humans, right? We do this all the time now. But what happens if you take pig DNA and put it into a human being? Does that person become a pig? Right? These are the sorts of things they were thinking about exotically, but also more sort of mundane things such as incidental findings. Because when you have a population-based population-based database, then you will find things about people that maybe they didn't know. What do you do with that data? So these are sorts of things I'm going to talk about in the last part of my talk. But let's go back to what is GenEthics, right? GenEthics. So the idea at core, and this guy who wrote this book, David Hyde, is a friend of mine. He's a great Jewish individual, Jewish scholar. And he talks about the moral issues with the creating of people. That's how he defined it in like 1990 when that book came out. And really he was thinking about these sorts of things, about human cloning. Right? We're creating people. This is a newfound power that we have. And we should be thinking about that in a deep way, in a sophisticated way. But also, he was worried about, and people after that were worried about in the Aasim project, what happens when things become commercialized. Right? Today you have 23andMe, and all of a sudden you have your own genomes being, your own sort of DNA sequences being evaluated and accessed and kept in repositories by these for-profit companies. How should we think about that? What will that lead to? And he didn't think about this, but now I think about this because I have 4 children. Right? Should I buy this niche game? I don't know what it's about, but it looks pretty cool, right? It's a nice survival game. So they're going to now splice DNA, teach kids how to do this, because you can actually do hacking. You probably know this, right? You can go on eBay, buy some CRISPR-Cas9 things, and be your own experiment, hack your own body. I don't know what that will lead to, but it's a brave new world out there. So in any case, you can do that in a simulated way on these games for kids. So in any case, tonight, I'm going to kind of distill all this, that's the history, and I'm going to talk about 3 different things today, hopefully. Right? So bioethics, you want to talk about bioethics, let's talk a little bit about ethics. I'm going to define it for you, the way I think about it. The professor's going to tell me it's wrong, but for now, I have the stage, she doesn't, so I can tell you whatever I think about it. And some contestations within the field. GenEthics, we're going to talk about that, what that means, and then I want to make a claim that GenEthics operates with some ontology of the human being, right, undergirding all this sort of conversation. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about Islamic bioethics. I still don't know what that is, but perhaps I'll share some thoughts with you and how that might intersect with GenEthics. And what you'll leave here with is, so for those budding researchers, I want to share some sort of research methods with you. Discourse analysis, a little bit about how you do literature review methods. So for you doing your thesis, you can figure out, you can glean some, take some slides and figure out how to do some of this work. For those religious thinkers and chaplains in the back, some food for thought. And for you academicians, I'm going to give you some complexity, some nuance, but no answers. I don't have any answers in this field. I think we just have to think, right? But no one pays us to do that. So anyway, I'm not sure we're ever going to get anywhere. So let's start with this, bioethics, right? So what is bioethics? And for all of us, right, we're here with some interest in these sort of new issues that are occurring. Bioethics is a field that's very multidisciplinary. People who have, like me, or physicians, who are talking about bioethics and are in centers for bioethics, and we teach ethics fellows. We have PhD philosophers. We have legal scholars, right? They're all interacting around the same table, thinking about analyzing issues that interface with life sciences, right? Medicine, environmental issues. So that's the other issue, right? The bioethics now encompasses everything. Almost everything is a bioethical issue. Climate change is a bioethical issue. Right? So everything is a bioethical issue. Part and parcel of that is because, yes, truly, societies tend to think about bodies, right? And that's how we think about it. So a little Foucauldian twist there. There's contestations about the bio, but there's also contestations over the ethical. So how do we actually, if we get all these different scholars together, how do we think about moral truths? Is there such a thing? In a postmodern moment where people think maybe there isn't such a thing. But when you're thinking of the legal register or the ethical register, then who is the authority structure? So I'm at a hospital, right? I sit on the ethics committee for a hospital. And when there's an issue raised, right, so anybody, a nurse, a patient, a physician, anybody can raise an ethics committee consultation. We come together and we meet and talk over the issue. And in the end, we try to analyze whether that person who did something or was going to do something, whether we all agree that that's within the bounds of what is ethical practice. What's the authority structure there? Us in the room saying that's not outside the bounds. That's it. There's nothing, right? If there's a legal issue, then the scholar will say, well, you can't, this is against the law. That's the floor. But the way we operate is that if those people in the room, and it could be someday that, you know, the curmudgeon didn't come, so there's no devil's advocate there, we're going to decide. But it's your community is deciding, right? There's some public rationale and public reason operating by which we can sort of decide, well, these things are outside the bounds of ethical practice and these things are within the bounds. It's as simple as that, but it's much more complex than that. So because I imagine I was going to speak to a religious audience, right? This is a classical problem that the Greeks had, Muslims had, this issue of divine command, you know, this problem of, well, you know, classically the formation is what does God love the pious, or God loves the pious are loved by God, right? So does God command what is right, right? Does he command what is right? Or what is right is that's what God commands. So this idea of whether there's an externality, right? There's some sort of characteristic of actions that is there And then God legislates because that externality, that righteousness is in the action. Or whatever God decides is right, and that's it. Right, so this is a problem that we have in the Muslim tradition as well, but this rears its head in bioethics. When you think about moral truths and norms, is there something like that? Is there a common morality framework, right, or not? And so this becomes a real problem for people like me who think of themselves as just bioethicists, right? That the way that we're going to reason, or we're going to draw upon the wisdom from a religious tradition. Because in the field, and I'm telling you this as your college students, is that there are people and there are sort of factions that would say that's not what we should be doing. That religion leads to a lot of conflict. And even publishing is a problem. Right? The kind of articles that want on religion have to do with those that are articulated with sort of a broad appeal and based on public reason. This becomes even more clear when you think about, I'm on the board of this journal, so I can do this. So this is one of our issues with all about religious bioethics. And we have articles, this was a Target article that we all commented on, right? That we had in defense of irreligious bioethics, and then, okay, in defense of religiously informed bioethics. No, we gotta release the religious morals of bioethics. Perhaps not, we shouldn't bias in religion, right? This is an entire issue at the premier journal, American Journal of Bioethics, in our field in the United States, around religion, right? Whether religion should be part of the conversation or not. So this happens in the literature, but also in the boardroom when we're looking at articles. So I just want you to know that because we are a sort of a contested field, and now we're a contested entity within that field. So moving forward, that's all in the background. Let's talk about go closer to our topic of today. I'm going to suggest that we will all agree, whether we're religious or not religious, or we believe in common morality or not, that what we do as bioethicists is that we make moral assessments of things. And in this case, we're going to talk about biotechnology. That involves three sort of domains, I'd say. One, what all of us do is think about the application side, right? The implications or ramifications of using some technology. Oftentimes, that's about harms and benefits, right? Harms and benefits to individuals or to society, but that we're doing this moral calculus, right? It's sort of, which I would argue is socially informed, right? We have to do some empirical work and social scientific work to get at that data. The other thing that we think about a lot is the science itself, right? Oftentimes, the issue there is the origin of that science. So a lot of conversations around whether we should be using Nazi science or not, right? They did the first experiments on hypothermia. So is the origin of that scientific data problematic for us or not? Right? Some of that is reflected. We do this less commonly, but that's an issue of that science itself, right? Where is it coming from? You'll see this in debates around vaccinations, right? People talk about, well, the fetal origin of some sort of vaccine, whatever else it is. So we think about whether that origin of that scientific data or that science itself is problematic. We do much less of this question about the nature and essence of that object that's acted upon, right? We do much less than that, and I'll talk about that, and that's a little bit more detail in a second. And I'll exemplify this question for you. So I'll leave the Arabic on top for those who know Arabic. We'll talk about that later. But here's the question, right? Since many of you, I imagine, are pre-med. So you're a doctor now, and the question is, should you act against the patient's wishes? Say you want to operate for their appendicitis, right? And they say no. What do? Should you, can you, is it ethically appropriate to act against the patient's wishes? You got to 9:30, don't worry. Yes? It's ethically appropriate. And how do you come to that conclusion, my friend? No? Yes?
I would say it depends if the patient is kind of well mentally.
Okay.
Because in some cases, if the patient, for example, has family that cares about them and wants them to make a specific decision to live or to live a better life, etc., and the patient decides that that they don't want to go against it, that they don't want to go with it, then it's kind of tricky here.
So yeah, the first thing, I got the first part, maybe not exactly the second part. The first part, so you want to think about the acuity of the condition, the patient, right? But then the second part, you're talking about their family, and what was the point of their family?
Yeah, I'm just saying that sometimes, for example, if someone is in a coma, so they can't make any decisions, so usually doctors or physicians ask the people around them, and people close to them, what should we do? Should we do this? Should we do that?
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing, that's why I said family, but I
Right,
meant
so
the
this
people close to.
surrogate decision makers, right? But let's take, I want to talk about it in a class way, not in a patient way. So is it ethically appropriate ever to act against the patient's wishes? You said maybe. How would you come to that conclusion? How would you reason about that? I want a moral truth here, not a circumstantial piece. Yes, sir.
I would think about the ways in which the Islamic tradition, the prophetic saying of there's no harm, there's no reciprocating harm, is very foundational, and that's very similar to the Hippocratic Oath, and so those that's kind of a moral, it's a moral framework which because the patient wants one to hasten their, they don't want to just say taken off life support and then just die outside of the support of the machinery, but wants their death to be hastened. Physician can't.
Perhaps that's the wrong way. So when you're thinking about it in a general way, as opposed to patient way, you're right. We think that surrogate decision making and what the family sort of says. And so what are the moral truths that you draw upon? One of them is always harm things. So I'm going to share a few with you that my students sort of talk about. Let's see. Right. So a lot of them just start with this harm business, right? So if, say, a patient doesn't want me to do something, and I'm going to do something, I'm going to be harming them, right? Potentially, because surgery is harmful all the time, right? I'm going to cut someone's body. You can't tell me that's not going to cause some harm. Maybe there's for a benefit that's going to accrue, but there is some harm. So perhaps, if this patient's competent and they're not in a coma, they say, no, I can't do this because I have this oath, or right, the idea of beneficence and non-maleficence. This is the harm, right? The other idea is, well, we have to respect this patient's choice. So you're not medical students, but when I talk to medical students, they also talk about autonomy, respect for autonomy, right? So the patient sort of says no, and they're making an informed decision, and have to respect that. Another way people think about it is, well, I can't do this because I would be placing my own value system above the patient, so I don't want to be paternalistic. These are all different ways, right? Just think about in the general formulation, we should not act against the patient's wishes, different ramifications. Now, all of it, I would say, yeah, that's true. It's part of the whole. Like, we all think about these things all the time. But what's underlying all of these, I believe, is that we have this notion of the human being. You're respecting the autonomy of a patient because you think that there's something about autonomy that's relevant to the human being. You're thinking about not harming someone because that someone means something, right? You don't think about that when you pull a blade out of grass out of a blade of grass out of the ground. You might not think about it when an ant's on the ground, right? That I'm stepping by that ant, or I'm doing whatever it is. Maybe you do, I don't often. But there's something about that human being that says I shouldn't harm them in a certain way. Or, right, that I shouldn't, when they make a case that I shouldn't be putting my values above theirs, again, that we have something in common, right? There's some denominator between us. So I'm going to argue, and you'll see it more clearly when we talk about GenEthics, that there's some conceptualization of the human being in the patient-doctor encounter that is at play in all these sorts of ways of reasoning. But oftentimes that's subliminal and taken for granted. And we all agree that there's a human here, right? Okay, so bearing that in mind, let's now move. Does anybody see it? Has anybody seen this? Really? Wow, so I'm not so old. Good, good. These guys look so young now. I mean, right, at this time. Anyway, I actually also saw that. So this is running with my college days. This is like second year of college, I believe. This came out. It was a free movie on Thursday night. It was really nice to go see it. Anyway, so GenEthics. What's GenEthics? Well, so I told you what David Hyde's status, but he basically sets out the field as a study of the ethical issues that arise out of the science of genetics and the use of genetic technologies. Now we had the genomics revolution that incorporates genomics as well. So I'm going to give you a glimpse of that discourse to think about what it's talking about. Right? So the way I did that was through a systematic review of Medline, which is a bibliographical database that most clinicians use for their daily practice. So we looked at the bioethics discourse. So GenEthics is a sort of a component or subdivision, I would say, of bioethics discourses. We looked at genomics and all these other terms. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but again, as I said, I like to be data-driven. So we wanted to see what people were talking about in this field. And at the time I did this work was 2016, so the last 5 years, right? What are the big things, big issues that people are talking about? Bioethicists are talking to bioethicists about this area, right? And what we did then was we looked at the qualitative content analysis of all these papers, right? So we looked at the titles, the abstracts, and actually had to read a lot of reading of these papers, and thinking about, well, what are they talking about, and why are they talking about things in a certain way? So you take that for granted, and then it came up, this is the paper, but we looked at 203 articles, right? So that's a lot of discussion if you think about it. There are not that many biology journals, but 203 of those articles talking about this area, right, in 5 years. And there were 6 main areas of concern that we grouped into, right? So information disclosure, data ownership, human enhancement and modification, sort of ethical structures and moral responsibility, and genomics research specifically, a lot about human reproduction. There were some things about vulnerable communities and populations. Well, I'm not going to talk much about that today. And obviously, the last thing was about environmental epigenetics. So these are the 6 areas of concern. The 3 I've underlined were the biggest areas, the most papers from those 3 domains. And I want to now make my assertion for the next portion of this talk, that all these 6 areas are related to 3 ideas about what the human being is. The first is that the human being is the source of information, right, about the past, present, and future. I'll describe this to you in a second. And that the human being is a reproductive organism. That's very clear. That was the second idea. And the third is that human beings are evolving entities. And the conversation that occurs in these papers around what we should do or what we shouldn't do, how we should do it, and the technologies that are coming about are based on thinking of the human being in this sort of way. That the language maps onto these. So I'll illustrate that in a second. Let's start with the first one. The human being as a source of knowledge, right? So we know this, right, in the vocabulary that we use, thinking about the human genome, and the way Bill Clinton talked about it as a map, right, as a blueprint, that genes we know make us who we are. Right? We quote that and say, this is how it happens. We use the term blueprint, right, that they're a blueprint for proteins, genes code for phenotype and behavior, they confer characteristics from one generation to the next. This is a lexicon that we've developed to talk about genes for many years. And so it makes sense that we think about the human being as a knowledge repository. Now, what is that knowledge? What is that information? We know that genetic information tells about the past, right? So ancestral linkages, or your parents, you can do 23andMe or whatever these shows you have to tell you where these people, these superstars, where they came from, and they're so crying, right? Whatever. I mean, so they have these ancestral linkages, right? What's really interesting is, what's her name? Helen Keller, right? Her famous statement is that if you go back far enough, you know that in every family tree there's a pauper or a slave and a king, right? So in any case, we would know about the past. What about the present? So I told you about precision medicine, right? So now if I have your genetic information, I can explain sort of why you have blue eyes and the rest of your family doesn't, right? Or I can explain what disease risks that you have in the future, right? What you're prone to. So there's a lot of information stored within those genes. But it's not just relevant to the individual, it's relevant to the people around them, right? So the genetic history relates to peoples in groups. So if I have a certain mutation in my genetic code, it could be in my family. So now that information is not just about me, my disease risk, but about the people around me, or my future generation, right? The kids moving forward. So this is information that's not just located about the individual, but family trees and others around them. So that's the human being as a data repository. Let's ask you a question, right? So you're at this wonderful college. They have these nice posters. I don't know if you guys have these, but we have in medical school, right? That the future of health begins with you. Sign up for being a part of a research project, right? And so you and your siblings sign up at the University Health Service because you see this wonderful poster. You want to become the future of health. So you're just going to take some swabs, right, from your mouth and one blood sample, and you're done. And they'll give you like $1,000. You're like, sign me up. I have books to buy this semester. So you sign up, and your siblings are going to college with you, so they sign up with you. And now those researchers are looking in this data, your genetic data. They find a few things. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands if this is what they should do with this data. So they first find out that you and your sibling have a 99% chance of being unrelated. Should they tell you or your sibling this? Wow, half the room. All right, okay. The next thing to find out is that your sibling, this is part of the reason why I found out you're not related, has a BRCA gene, right, which is related to early aggressive breast cancer. But you didn't have it. So should they tell your sibling this? All of you. and they find that this is also why you're not related, you have a recessive gene of hemophilia. So if you were to marry someone who has the same gene, your children might have hemophilia. Should they tell you that? A lot of people. Okay. All right. So let's think about that. So those are the questions about data, right? Who owns the data? I'm going to get back to your answer in a second. But like, who owns the data? Because in that scenario, right, after think about this, you sign up for research study to contribute to some big database. Who owns that data now? You? Because you gave me your swab, your sort of mouth swab. You gave me a blood sample. Do you own that data? Who owns the data? Right? Because if you own the data, then what am I? Do I have to have some sort of disclosure about what I'm going to do with that data? And then in 55 years down the road, am I like, what is it? Right? Who owns that data? Or is it the company that owns the data? Right? Just like Google owns the data, you have no right now to be forgotten. You probably saw that. In any case, these are questions that we were thinking about, right? And not only that, now say this is about your child's risk in the future, right? So say it's not going to affect you, it's going to affect your children. So am I supposed to now disclose to your children, find you, keep you in some database so that I can tell your children, hey, you know, maybe your dad didn't tell you that you have the BRCA gene. Right? How far do we go? And these are the sort of conversations that you have in literature, right? So do we have a duty to disclose, right? Or do we need consent and authorization to disclose, right? If I have some data. Is there a duty to rescue? Meaning that there's an obligation, this is a classical term, it's sort of duty to rescue in medicine and bioethics, but is there a duty to rescue people who are going to die or going to be having illness, right? So if I'm disclosed to you, you all said raise your hand, the BRCA gene, let me know, right? Because there's a disease risk, so I have duty to rescue and tell you about this. So on the other side, about the recipient, is there a right to know, right? So what if I didn't tell you had a 5% chance of, I don't know, having some Huntington syndrome or whatever? Is that 5%? Do you want to know that? Do you want to cause you anxiety about that? Right? So is there a right to know at all time, and what potentiality disease risk am I supposed to tell you about? Or the right not to know? So you and your sibling were not related. Do you have a right not to know? You're talking about no harm. Imagine what that would mean. Because if I told you you had the BRCA gene, and I didn't tell her, I mean, what am I doing, right? Are you a human? Any of that piece would disclose something is different here, right? And then when you tell your parents. So is there a right not to know? Right? Sorry, there's a question.
No, I was just reading my hand. There's a like.
Okay, there is a right not to know, yes. So the idea of no harm becomes a little bit problematic here, right? Let me think about this. So, I told you that Qatar has this sort of public health genomics institute. They did the Qatar genome. There was a conversation that I was at in 2016 around this question. And I want to tell you what this group of scholars, Muslim scholars there, talked about and issued in their sort of report about the Qatar genome. They basically said that if there's a disease risk, you should let people know. If there's an issue about lineage, don't let them know. Yeah, I had the same expression. Right? If there's a disease risk, let them know. If they do find out that their families are not the families they think they are, don't let them know there's a higher risk. Because of it's in our society, because we have to take pride in the lineage that we're in. There were some Muslim principles they brought in, I'll talk about them later. But that was their view of this, which some people were raising an attitude. But what do you mean? I don't understand why. And so if you don't want to believe them, there are these out there. You can find the truth about what your genetic code says, even if you were signing up for the Public Genome Project, you send your stuff in to some other place and they'll, for some fee, tell you what the real deal is. Alright, so the second sort of ontology at work here is the human as a reproductive organism. I think you all probably know how this happens. Some people don't still. But in any case, the question here, or the assertion here, is that there's an essential characteristic of a human being to reproduce. Now, naturally, we reproduce sexually, right? But there's a possibility to reproduce asexually too, which we didn't have now. We didn't have before, now we do have. So, how does that work? Well, I told you about reproductive cloning, and we'll talk about that again in a few minutes, in a few slides. But now I have questions for you again. So biomedicine is situated in the context of society, right? All this technology, all this biopower is constituted in the society here, socially situated. So is medicine obligated to help you reproduce, help people reproduce? One, in biology class, in your biology majors, right? You learn about the science of a living organism, or whatever the 7 things, and right? So a virus is not living. Part of the reason why it can't live or be a living entity is because it can't reproduce by itself. So this is an essential characteristic that we've determined for life. So now, if biomedicine can help you reproduce asexually, is it obligated to do so? Raise your hand. All right. Half hand? All right. Okay. We're at a college campus. People want to not reproduce asexually. Okay. Very good. So here's this question now. All right. So we can do it, right? We can truly do it. So here's a few questions in the clinical arena. So now imagine that a family comes to you and says, that there's this patient in the ICU that's declared brain dead. We can talk about it in Q&A if you want what that means, but brain dead, legally they're dead. But she wanted to have a child. And can you go and take out her eggs, right, her ova, so that her husband who's still living can do IVF, fertilize that egg with his sperm and have a child? They didn't have a chance to have children. She wanted to have a child with him. As a doctor, do I say yes? It's all possible.
Yeah.
Yes or no? Yeah?
Of course.
Okay. Minority. This is majority view that I'm going to kind of then problematize it, but minority view. Okay. Let's move forward. So now we have a same-sex couple. They want to have a child. It's not possible in the normal ways, right? Meaning to have both genetic material from them. But we can actually do this as well. We take the nucleus from, say there are 2 males, from their sperm, have a donor egg, put the nucleus in the donor egg, and now they can have a gestational carrier, right? But have a child that's produced with the genetic components of both of that couple. Possible. Happens actually. Am I obligated to do this? One person. 2, few. Okay. A few more. Right? Okay. And the big one. Reproductive cloning. Superstars can have their dogs, I think, cloned now, yeah? But real superstars can have themselves cloned. So we should ask the Kardashians where they want to go. But in any case, I mean, the legacy will live on. So in any case, if it's not, there's actually not an if. We can do this a lot of errors. It's like Dolly. It took like, I think 53 tries or something to get Dolly. We could do this with humans. It would just take a lot of trying. Should we do this? If someone says, hey, I don't want to have a partner, I just want to have a future me, a mini me. Yes or no? You're down now. You don't want this. Not this one. Okay. All right. So those are the conversations that we ethicists have. Fun stuff in the literature. We debate whether or not we should do these sorts of things. And there are certain vocabulary that's used to talk about these things as well. So does everybody have a right to reproduction? Right. If we've defined biological life in a certain way, and now we have the ability to have everybody to reproduce, right? But previously couldn't. Then why can't they demand from us a right to be able to reproduce? Right? Or more important now, the second layer of this is so the duty of procreative beneficence, meaning that we should be doing selection of children that are going to have the best chances for success biologically, physically, even morally. We can select genes, right? The whole Gattaca idea here, we can select genes and right that are going to set them up for success. And then there's the idea of these things that we don't necessarily need to talk about, but the idea that once you've done that, right? So there was this argument about, well, if I have a child, or I have an embryo, which is not yet in the Muslim tradition sold, or not yet a child according to science, whatever else it is, because we call it an embryo and not a child or a fetus at that stage. But in any case, if I have that, because I did some gene splicing, there's the one, just the child, the potential zygote or the embryo that in the pre-change state have a right to complain that they weren't born, this one was born. Say I had a disease, make it more simple, right? And I want to get rid of that gene so that person didn't have a disease. So the person who's going to have the disease have a right to complain that they weren't born. Yes, these are the odd things that we talk about, so that's right there. So anyway, we debate whether that there would be a complaint, grounds for complaint for that person or potential person that would have been created without us manipulating that DNA. All right, okay. Now let's move to the third sort of case, right? Did anybody see this? It's on Netflix, guys. Okay, all right, I saw it. I don't know, it was interesting to me. So you and your sibling are still at college, you moved beyond Williams College, now you're in grad school, you got much more bigger toys. So they sign you up for an experimental program to make your lungs better. Because you know what? You're living in Brazil, and the rainforest is burning, and we have bad air quality. So we want to make your lungs stronger, right? You have disposition to having asthma, we're going to do some good work here to make your lungs stronger, you don't have to deal with all this pollution, you'll be fine. You can run your 400 miles. Now, the only challenge is that DNA is walrus DNA, right? Because walruses breathe in dirty environments. So once you're spliced with walrus DNA, are you still a human? Well, your DNA has changed. DNA is not essential to your being.
Will we look like that?
That's not walrus DNA, that was something else. They were going to Mars. We're going to burn it, right? Anyway, I want to tell you, go to Netflix, look it up. So the underlying idea here is, right, if you said that, is that the human being is an evolving entity, right? So the UNESCO has this amazing statement that the human genome has dignity. And so we shouldn't change it. But every day, every moment, you're having mutations in your genome. Every minute. The human genome, whatever it is never really stable, right? So this idea is that, oh, well, the human genome evolves in mutations and selection all the time. So if we were going to say, I'm going to introduce some alien DNA here, walrus DNA, and because we have an environment that you can better survive in with walrus DNA, am I enhancing you or not? Or is this just therapy? Right? If you had some other sort of pressure, like the sickle cell sort of pressure, right? Maybe the DNA would have gone that way anyway. So am I doing anything really that's not going to happen in some amount of time? Because if you're trying to help people in that society to flourish in an environment that's changing, then this is fine. It will help them flourish. They won't be suffering from asthma when there's pollution, right? Because they have stronger lungs, because walrus DNA has created those alveoli. And what Titan's about is sort of like this, right? That we can help humans adapt to alien worlds. Now, we're not very good at it, right? But we could potentially do that. Create certain types of genetic sequences that would be heartier for worse environments. Alright, so in any case, this is the underlying idea that the human is always evolving, its DNA is always evolving, then this distinction between therapy and enhancement perhaps is not as sharp as we think. Good? You all want me to talk about Islam, or some people want me to talk about Islam. Let's see what Islam has to say, aside from the first thing I told you. So let me first start talking about Islamic bioethics, which I told you confuses me, although I talk a lot about it. Because everything's contended, right? Everything's contentious. What is Islamic? You'll hear a lot of people say a lot of things, but we still debate, right? What are the sources of moral normativity? Go to your bookstore, you like the bookstore earlier, right? Shahab Islam, 700 tome, what is Islam, right? You're still debating it, right? I actually reviewed as a student in the class. But literally, right, 700 pages still trying to figure out what Islam is. So you're not going to resolve it, and I'm not going to either, I'm not in this field. What are the methods of research and derivation? So if you're going to call something Islamic, how does it become Islamic? Right? This is a contestation of the field. And then also bioethics. I told you bioethics has its own problems, including the scope of concern. And now, for an Islamic bioethics, where does this fit in with bioethics? Right? I told you there's contention of our religion in any case. Now the Islamic version, right? So is Islamic bioethics for Muslims? Is it universal? Who's going to read it? Anybody deciding it? I mean, I don't know. So there's a big problem about this field. But nonetheless, all of us, when we say we want to hear Islamic bioethics, this is what we're thinking. We're thinking that we're going to have some good physician talk to some religious scholar who's going to think about the sources of Islamic law, the objectives and maxims, and issue some sort of fatwa about whether we should do something or we shouldn't, right? So does Islam say to take the ova from the brain-dead woman so that her husband can have a child? Wait a second, if she's dead, there's no husband. I don't know, there's a lot of questions. So what the fuck are you going to get? So you're going to have muftis and scholars say a lot of things, and you're going to frame the question certain ways, right? Because if I just change that term, there's no husband. Do you realize what I'm saying? That the language I use betrays how I think about the problem. Simple terms like that. So if I'm using the idea of the DNA blueprint building block lexicon, what do you think they're thinking of in that fashion? I'm not giving them anything about the science. I'm just using terms to describe science, which they don't. And that can change the way you think about fatwa, which is why this field is also problematic, because there's a lot of terms deployed which kind of can shift the balance towards one, permissibility or impermissibility or permissibility. Okay, so fatwas are part and parcel of Islamic bioethics. Here are some sort of studies of fatwa, right? So you have this from scholars in Egypt. The first one, this is Barded Klein, she does a study of Egyptian fatwas. The second one's from South Africa. Same thing, the Juridical Academy got together and issued some fatwas on things. Even the bioethics literature, you have groups looking at e-fatwas, online fatwas, and I heard today at dinner at the Al Academy, they're going to be their own fatwa issuing body in medical fiqh pretty soon. Right? They're going to issue all the standard fatwas around medicine. The field that just has just fatwa givers or Islamic law, there are people who think about this beyond fiqh. Right? So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but there are scholars and academicians saying, well, you know, Islamic law only gets us so far. Just like the law here gets us so far. It's like a floor. Right? Ethics is above that. So if you're talking about Islamic bioethics, it has to be a little bit more beyond fiqh. And then you have physicians writing about whatever their mind wants to write about, and whichever journal will publish it. Yeah. Including me, I'm not on this list. But yeah, right, so we pontificate about things far and wide, and we sort of draw upon different aspects of the tradition too. So, and interestingly and importantly, countries that claim or say that they use Islamic law as a source of legislation also issue policy statements, right? So Islamic bioethics is not just fatwas now, it's actually part of law in Muslim countries. So you have to think about that as well. So what happens is because of all these sort of different authors writing in different sort of contexts, you have a lot of confusion of terms. And I would argue for us, like you're going to find you're not going to find much literature out there on Islam and GenEthics. You're just not, right? Because we're not intersecting in a consistent way with the field of bioethics. And the centers and learning are disparate, are sort of far from conversations that are happening in seminaries. So it's largely a reactive discourse that responds, right, to developments in the quote-unquote West. The paradigms of, now you should know this, the paradigms of ethical thinking in Muslim lands and medicine are also imported from quote-unquote Western lands. Right? We teach principlism in Doha, Cornell, and Qatar. That's what we teach. So we should know that not only biomedicine is being imported, right, but also the ethical systems within it. And then, as I said here already, that the Islamic centers of learning, if you want to call them seminaries, are disconnected from the bioethics academy or the medical academy or even the scientific academy. They're just elsewhere. So those conversations aren't really happening in a concerted way. So to not leave you with some skeptical idea, I'm going to give you something to hold on to. Not much, but something to hold on to. Just to think about something about it. So the way I think about it is as a discourse, right? As a discourse between some entity in the medical field and some entity that claims to be an Islamic authority, or people say they are an Islamic authority. Yeah, traditionally that's a physician, right? And that's an Islamic scholar. But around them are a lot of scientists, right? Social and empirical scientists, right? Philosophers who are thinking and looking at that interaction. And actually, that interaction by the scientists and looking and gazing, observing and analyzing is much more informative sometimes than just the fatwa to the doctor. Because it gives you a greater picture of the conversation, the reason why this conversation is happening in a certain way, why that vocabulary is being used in a certain way. Because you have a holistic appreciation of the challenge that they're facing. So for me, Islamic ethics is about all of this, right? So yes, it certainly has and draws upon the moral machinery of Islamic tradition, right? So Islamic law, moral theology, sort of fiqh, or other aspects of ethics, but it has to integrate and think about all these other partners in the conversation. What does this mean for clinical practice, for social science, social scientific data should be incorporated in fatwa making, the medical sciences, philosophy, bioethics, right? So all these other fields need to be intersected with and in dialogue when you're thinking about an Islamic ethics ruling. So we're going to now move a little bit to talking about genetics. In a second, I told you about the Arabic up on top, right? So you people who speak Arabic or are studying Arabic, what does that say? Yes?
The one in the middle, or?
The top.
Oh. الحكم الشرعي, or no?
على شيء, yeah?
على شيء
فرعاً.
that's an A. فرعاً تصوره.
Right. Any idea what that means? Very good.
Now, no what?
Very good. You know what that means?
تصوره, no.
Well, a hukm, right? So the,
Yeah, الحكم is like the judgment.
right?
The
على شيء.
on something.
Very good.
فرعاً, is it like from فرع?
Far'an is sort of incumbent upon, starts upon.
Okay.
Far'an is two
I don't know what
propositions.
تصوره.
Tasawwurihi, upon its
tasawwurihi.
conceptualization. Yeah, the sweet, it's conceptualization
Oh,
of the
okay,
matter.
yeah.
Right, so a judgment about a thing is sort of dependent upon, is interconnected to, there's different ways you can translate that part, upon the conceptualization of the thing, right? So that's the issue that we're at. We have to conceptualize the bioethical issue first, right? So I would suggest that if you're going to create Islamic bioethics, let's start with theology or kalam, right? What is the thing that we want to get rid of? Disease? What is disease? What's the human being? Right? We have to start with these big concepts, which is not how fiqh started in the era, but for now we have to think about it this way. And then what are the goals, right? So if you want to use in class ethics teaching, you know, the end goals, the end goal we have to think about, if you're talking about moral satisfaction, which is fiqh, the agent focus, right? So you have to think about the act-based, action-based, agent-based morality. So all this is in our tradition. We have to bring it all together to furnish an Islamic bioethical ruling. So let's think about the human being, this first conceptualization of the human being as a data repository. And I said I'm going to share with you some things in the literature that you'll get if you look deep enough. So when Muslim scholars were thinking about these juridical councils about genetic data, they were debating how do we think about this knowledge? What sort of knowledge, in the categories of knowledge that we have in epistemology in our tradition? Is it categorically beneficial? Right? It's all the time. If that's the case, if it's always beneficial, genetic data, then it has to be, in a fiqhi sense, always listened to use. Right? And they said, no, it's not always good. So then the question is it certain? So if you say 99.9%, you two are not siblings, is that yaqeen, is that certain? Or is this what we say, it's dominant probability? Where does that rely? Because it's not 100%. It can always be error. If it is in some higher level of certainty, perhaps we can ground obligations based upon the fiqh. This is a conversation, meaning that you can make an obligation based on probabilistic knowledge. But if it's probabilistic, then we have to think about the harms and risks. Right, so that issue I told you about, right, when the scholars are saying, okay, well, if it's a health risk, tell them. If it's a paternity issue, don't tell them. They could arrive at that because they said this is not certain knowledge. And if this is not 100% certain, then I can weigh the harms and benefits. And in our society, the harm of people finding out that they're not related to their parents is going to be a chaos in our society. Because they're illegitimate children. People are going to be disowned. Dying children, families are going to be broken apart. We don't want that. But if there's a potentiality for disease, let them know so they can do something about it. So it looked problematic, right? You can use it this way, not this way. But they said if we decide that it is not certain knowledge, then we can do that. Just weigh the harms and risks. No moral calculus. This becomes even more interesting for you all when you think about paternity in more detail. So they were thinking about paternity because this is a big issue in our societies and in Muslim legal conversation as well. So you had this idea Well, can we allow, because now we have court cases where people are bringing forth DNA evidence to establish or negate paternity. How do we deal with this? Because in our tradition, there are several sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ about this. So for example, there's this ritual. If you have a father, or sorry, a man and a woman, and the woman saying this child is his man's, right? And he says, no, it's not mine. She says, no, it is. How do we establish? So the idea would be that this man would take oaths. I swear to God, it's not mine. She would say, no, I swear to God, it is. And he said, no, I swear to God, it's not mine. And she said, no, it is. So when he said, whoever takes the most oaths, in this case, when the man takes the most oaths, no, it's not his. He's taken so many oaths to God because he knows he'll now be in hell, right? If he's an upright person. This is not theirs, unless there's some other reason. Okay? So this existed. So they were like, well, that is the way we can negate paternity, because classically a person could take oaths and they're putting themselves in the deepest depths of hell if they keep on doing this, right? Because society generally was morally upright. Can this established method overrule DNA? Is DNA certain? If he takes that oath and he's a Muslim, he's certain he's going to go to hell, right? Okay, so they were doing this, and they said, no, oath-taking dominates over DNA evidence. You might disagree. I'm just telling you, this is what they did. And it's not funny. They're doing it because they assume that the person is morally upright. Why did they come to Muslim court? Right? And we have no other, this is circumstantial evidence. DNA is circumstantial evidence. He's taking oaths. Right? This guy is putting his afterlife at risk. If he wants to do that, well, then he's doing that. Because the afterlife is everlasting, right? So there's a whole assumption of the working of society, and this is actually established precedent in all legal schools. So we can't take circumstantial evidence over established precedent. All right, it gets even more interesting in a second, but let me get this second thing play out. So the first idea was, how do you bring DNA evidence in? Because if you have an established rule for how you negate paternity, you needed a way to bring it in. So at the time of the Prophet, peace and blessing upon him, there was this idea that people could tell by the shape of your feet and the way you look, right, who you're related to. When there were known, right, there was no way to establish paternity. What was that? That was science at the time. So the way you bring in DNA evidence is on the back of this. So if you said, because otherwise you can't allow science in, because that's not the way we establish norms around negating paternity. So if you write on the back of physiognomy, right, which again is not 100%, again you can't rule over the other. Oh, it's not 100%. So it entered, and it was on the back of something that was probabilistic, it has to stay there. And there's a statement of the Prophet I'll show you in a few minutes about this becoming more clear. But anyway, that's how they did it. These were the conversations, and this is the established sort of our precedent, and this is also why, I'm trying to explain to you why they're all about, don't tell us about paternity mismatch. Okay? This is why. They have many reasons to do so in the tradition. Okay. Moving to another area, because human reproduction is very interesting. There are many things we can do, I already told you, but let's talk a little bit about the human being as a reproductive as a reproductive organism in general. So does the Muslim tradition say that? So, is reproduction an essential part of the human being? Here's a verse, the two verses in the Quran, where you might say maybe not, right? So the verses go that, I put the translation for you anyway, it's there, right? So for God is the being of the heavens and the earth, He creates whom He wills, He makes whoever He wants, He gives to whoever He wants, bestows upon whoever He wants, children who are female, and then men who are female, or male children, and He gives, to them, both males and females, right? The couple can have men and women as children. But here's the verse, I don't have a pointer. And He makes whom He wants barren. And no idea, right? And He is all-knowing, all-competent, or all-powerful, all-capable. However you want to translate that. So this verse sets up the idea, yes, that it is from the ayat, right? The dominion belongs to God and the heavens, right? So that it's from His show of His power and dominion over reproduction. He gives children that are male, children that are female, and at the same time makes some people barren. So part of humanity, some part of humanity, the normal bell-shaped curve is people who will be infertile. So your definition of life now is problematic. Because not everybody, essentially everybody does not need to have the ability to reproduce. Okay, so this is a question, although you'll see in the journal writings, everybody says we have been co-opted. Infertility is a disease. You'll see this all the time. Islamic scholars say infertility is a disease. And I'm not saying they're right or wrong, I'm just saying that there's space for us to think about it in a different way. Right? The other thing that then becomes, right, how do we define parenthood? So in this here, right, you can have sperm and ova donation if you can't develop sperm or you don't have ova that are working, whatever else it is. You can have uterus transplantation for a woman who doesn't have a uterus, but you can have gestational surrogacy. I told you about the arrangement, right? So IVF, sperm and egg meet, they become a zygote, they become an embryo, then I have a contract with another person to bear a child, like Kardashian, they do everything like the Kardashians. So then we get the child, yes? All right, very good. So now the question is, how do we think about this arrangement? So in the Quranic verse, this is part of the verse, right? This beginning I've truncated for a reason. But it says, that those are definitely shortly are your mothers who have borne you. Right? So motherhood is attached to this, right? This birthing, this bearing, this gestation. So now, if that's a big thing in the Quran, what about that person who's just in surrogate? Is she the mother? And not the person who gave the egg? I don't know what happens at your schools, but when I was in medical school at Cornell, everybody wanted to have ova donated by the female medical students. They were paid $3,000 a pop. I'm being serious with you in New York City. Right? Because they wanted to have ova donated by very brilliant future doctors at elite schools. So I don't know what happens to gestational surrogacy, but I'm telling you, that's $3,000. I can only imagine what people get as surrogates. Right? That's a long time. So, but who's the mother? The mother is not, in this case, the donor, or even the person who had the egg, or the genetic relationship, but just the gestational. This is also something that Muslim scholars are dealing with. And I'll write a paper on this soon. That's what I'm trying to work on tomorrow morning. I was working on today. But it's a challenge for them because of the way the Quran is. The Arabic here is very clear about how it thinks about motherhood. Yeah.
How about maybe my partners?
Yeah, they don't use it in this case. I'll talk about that in Q&A for a second. How we use wet nurse. Okay, so now I said I'm going to get back to this case about right now. So you have a couple, and there's a question of whether or not that child, all right, to that woman is of that person, the male, who is her husband. And the principle of Islamic law is that the child is for the bed spread because it comes with this saying of the Prophet ﷺ. It says, "Al-walad al-firash, right? So the child is for the bedspread, and for the adulterer is the stone. So if you have a legal marriage, right, then you can't say that's not my child. The principle is that is your child because you're legally married. Now, if you were doing some hanky-panky business, we have a problem with physiognomy and we have DNA. But if there is a legal marriage, that's your child. You cannot say that is not your child based on this. Unless you say my wife's adulterous, and then you have problems. We want to keep society together. So what happens now? You have a gestational carrier. She's got a husband. Who's the father? Not the donor of the sperm. He's the father. Because he's married to the mother. Yeah, interesting things. So this is why they say, don't do any of this. Right? It's a problem of confusing lineage. So the Sunni tradition, I'll tell you the Shia in a second. The Sunni tradition doesn't like any of this. There can be no third party anywhere. No donation of sperm and ova, no gestational surrogacy, because we're going to have lineal disruption of who's the gestational mother, who's the genetic mother, who's the social mother, who's the legal mother, who's the father, and we don't want any of this. Close the door, be done. We have to protect lineage, and this is not possible. We live in a world today, unfortunately, where it's all possible, right? And it happens. The Shi'i tradition, the Shi'i scholars, generally, now I'm going to tell you, Khamenei, who's the Ayatollah, right, the big Ayatollah now, he's very interesting, he allows a lot of stuff, but even, he allows everything. Embryo donation, he allows. Embryo donation, okay? But the other Ayatollahs are a little less, they're a little more maybe conservative. But they just said, we're going to go with genetics. We're going to take science and take science as it was telling us. So the genetic mother, the producer, they say, the producer of the sperm is the father, the producer of the egg is the mother, meaning the nuclear producers are the parents. Whatever else you want happens. So you can do this, you can do whatever you want, but whoever donated, that becomes a problem too, right, in a certain sense. But they said we're going to go full on with genetics, that's what parenthood is. That verse you should interpret that way, because the first part of that verse talks about people who would say, divorce a person by saying you're as good to me as my brother's back. So take the context of the verse. That verse is not talking about anything else. It's trying to say, that's not how you say, I'm divorcing you. Okay. So, there was one more thing. What did I want to say about this? Yeah. So this all becomes another challenge, because traditionally, adoption, in the sense we think about here, is not Islamically permitted. Now you say, what do you mean? I mean that adoption is in the sense that someone takes on my family name if I adopt them, and I give them inheritance as my son or my daughter. Not the idea that I can have foster parenting or rearing, right? That's permitted. But you cannot take someone on as part of your family, because the lineage is point. So they will always be the son or child of whoever the parents were, although I'm taking care of them. So you see now, because what happens is all this becomes not possible then, in a certain sense. Right? For a lot of Sunni world. Okay, alright, so as I said, right, the hukm, the Islamic legal ruling is dependent upon how you conceive of things. So the question for us is whether we conceive of DNA as the language of God, right? He communicates to us through DNA. And if that's how we thought about it, then I ask you, who was he writing to? Because we're the ones who are reading it. Was God writing to us in DNA so we can read it? I don't know, but maybe think about it that way. Francis Collins makes a good argument in his book about why this is the case. From our tradition, Rumi says just be quiet. Silence is the language of God. Right? Silence. Sukut. So you can decide. I want to end there. Thank you. So you asked about milk one. Let me address that first. So that's a special relationship. You don't know that people who nurse mothers are considered mothers in the sense that the person who the child that they rear is now not able to marry them. Their brothers, some say, the brothers and sisters of the same milk nurse or milk mother, nursing mother, sort of are in some cases, in some they are also, you can't marry them. But that's how it's related, right? That they become a parent. And some, it depends on which fiqh you're talking about. For some Sunni schools, it's just the act. The act. So some is going to have a certain amount of feedings, 3 feedings. So there's a little more context to that. But they don't use that at all in this. So there was an argument made about, well, can we treat the gestational mother as a milk mother? And they said no. And I don't exactly remember the meeting. I have some, but the argument of scholars. So a physician raised this question actually, and scholars said no, that's a special category of parentage. It doesn't actually have to do with inheritance either. So we're not going to do this because the verse of the Quran is about gestation. So again, this would create confusion, right? So we're just going to close the door. We don't want any of this to happen. Anyway, but there's a line of reasoning that some people said, well, maybe we think about it. I'm not sure how the Shi'i tradition actually goes through this either, which the Ajahn said. All right, other queries, questions? Concerns? Yeah. back there.
So, especially in the last few things that you mentioned, I feel like a huge concern there is lineage. And, for example, like the gestational mother not being allowed and all that kind of stuff. So, is there is there a debate going on whether that sort of preservation of lineage and paternal lineage is sort of like its importance, and whether that's, so just put it in a circumstantial sort of situation, whether that's still significant, how important it is to preserve that? Because if the answer to that is yes, then all these like fiqh rulings make more sense than if you sort of like start doubting that thing.
Yeah, so they really can't, unfortunately. So this is how it comes about. There's in a previous slide I talked about the objectives and maqasid of Islamic law. So within them, scholars looked at, and there's many scholars, but the theoreticians sort of said, if you want to take Shatibi, for example, who was considered the father of this field, he looked at the verses in the Quran that are from Mecca, which were legislative. Then he looked at the Madhi Quran, that he felt were explaining them. And then he looked at the Sunnah and the legal rulings in there. So he came up with this, and others before him, Joini and Al-Azadi, but that there are higher objectives. There are objectives, essential objectives in Islamic law. And they enumerated them. He enumerated 5, others enumerated 6. Within them was one of this, and scholars have sort of agreed upon these, right? That these are the essential human interests that the law has come to serve. Life, so not like Jefferson, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but here, right, you have life, or religion, life, and then these two come first. There's a debate which is first or which is second. And there's a category of 3 that come together. Wealth, intellect, and progeny or lineage. So some people add a 6th, which is honor, which would then, if you can say, the 6th is honor, so then we don't need lineage, because lineage is part of honor, right? But others say, no, it's progeny, and progeny equals lineage. And so you really can't, because they agree that all of Islamic law comes to serve these 5, 6 essential objectives. So they use that all the time, Sunni scholars do, that we have to protect lineage. And then what grows out of that? That a child has a right to know whence it came from, has a right to have inheritance from its progenitors, right? So these are legal obligations. I mean, if you don't leave a will, right, inheritance, you're sinful. Now the Quran tells us the inheritance, so that's good. It tells us that if you didn't leave a will, how to divide up the shares, right, to your children. But the idea that a child that's born into this world should know where it came from, that makes sense with adoption, right? So it just makes sense that this is all part and parcel of why the Prophet said how to choose spouses. It's because of this. So they were able to take all of these sorts of relationships about marriage, how to seek spouses, and say, yes, from this we can now induct that the child needs to know where it came from, which would also make this a problem. So yeah, you're right. If you can discard that, maybe you can do a lot of things, but it's very hard, and you're not going to discard that in the Sunni world. Yes?
Forgive me if I misunderstood something, but
Sure.
I'm curious about how one resolves potential conflicts among really important values. Like, for example, if one can't disclose about a BRCA gene without thereby making a disclosure about lineage.
Right.
Is there a way to?
Are you talking about those scholars at that conference? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So, I was in the audience there, and there were some other people there, and we were sort of trying to figure out how you do that. And so they sort of said, they explained their policy document, right? So they have, this is applied now, that and I don't know how it happens at the ground level, but they sort of said what I just shared with you, that when it comes to lineage issues, we're not going to disclose that. Now, part of the things that makes it easy is that maybe that community isn't so savvy scientifically about what these genes sort of mean, right? And how the BRCA is transmitted or whatever else it is. So perhaps it won't be a problem in practice. But they were very clear that you cannot there's no duty or anything. You will not disrupt families, and you will not disclose lineal issues at all. And so that's being practiced now in that society.
Well, I just mean even if it's, I think it's implicit.
Well, right, but you're not saying that, right? So you're not, right? So now if they do some, I don't know, I don't know what happens with substance weight, but how come they don't have it? They can say maybe it's a mutation. I don't know, I don't know a lot. I don't know how it's happening on the ground level with genetic counselors, right? So do they sort of say, well, you know, incomplete transmission? I mean, they could use a lot of ways to explain this, which may or may not be accurate, but I don't know what they do. Yes, sir.
Were these legal scholars bound to their vernacular, or were they interested with the ability to go between the two with both majority, minority, all the opinions of the Senate?
Yeah, so the rulings I'm sharing with you are from several councils, right? So these are transnational bodies. So we can talk about what specific scholars say, but the things I share with you today are from like the Scientific Academy of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, right? Which has scholars from across the world appointed by their governments, including some Shi'i scholars. They come with a judicial decision that is consensus-based. And so they are not bound, that whole process is not bound to any legal school. It's sort of what we all sort of think are consensus guidelines here for us from our different traditions, Sunni and Shi'i. Although there's a question about how many, there's not that many Shi'i countries as you know, so they're not that represented. It's mostly Sunni. So yes, like Padela is there, other people there, they sort of draw how they think the best approach would be. Now he might have his own opinion, it's fatwa, or Baya might have his own opinion, but they're all present. Taqi Osmani was there, right? And the ruling that comes out is signed by all. Yeah.
I'm wondering how, I guess it seems as though the Islamic tradition, or whatever that is, has its like has its own idiosyncrasies and things that are very particular to it. So, you know, not that it's like bound by the tradition, but in a lot of ways it's bound by its scriptures, both like in terms of its rulings or its moral views.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there's room for the Islamic discourse to at all be involved at like a world scale with like a whole range of ethical views and moral backgrounds and whatnot. Because there is obviously, and you mentioned we should look slides where there's a call from the bioethical community to include the voices of religious traditions, and oftentimes in the U.S. in particular, you have the voice of like Catholic tradition, various Christian or Jewish or Buddhist traditions, and everybody kind of like mentions their moral frameworks or backgrounds and kind of like what their tradition has to offer. And oftentimes it's not mentioned some degree of generality and whatnot, but it can still be relevant. But it seems as though the Islamic tradition has a lot to work on, like in and of its own. So is there anything it can contribute, or should it be looking to contribute at all to the grander, world scale conversation?
So I'm going to ask that in 2 ways. Is to say, imagine you're at this juridical council, right? 57 scholars, 15 scientists. I mean, it's a big mega thing, I think, of the block. So you have a great place to be at. And you say, we spent 4 days, and we said a big X through all this. Okay? Right. So you say that. Now imagine what you feel you've done. What you feel you've done is you've saved the world from all this confusion. The world is confused. There are now legal cases in the United States about gestational mothers wanting to keep the child. Yeah? There's confusion in the CNN. Someone donated some sperm, but it was a doctor who said, I'm the one who inseminated that. Right? I mean, they read this stuff like we did. Like, we just closed this whole door. We're going to save so many people from all these problems that are happening. I mean, they're not being, I'm being honest, that's right. That our tradition is saving all this problem. And why? Because the family is under attack in every society today. So we're doing a service to humanity. And our tradition is universal, right? This is why those verses are this way. So we feel we've done an incredible feat for mankind. I'm not arguing with that's right. From their perspective, they investigated the issues, they saw what was happening, they said, but our tradition guides us this way, thank God. Literally, thank God that that's how our tradition speaks about these things. So, I can't argue with that. For them to say, well, let me explain to you in a multi-faith environment why we think this way. Well, I just did, right? These are the verses. We're bound to them. We believe they have moral truth. That's universal. And yes, there are others who can interpret it differently, but we, as a group of diverse scholars, interpret it this way. Maybe that will change in the future. So there isn't a reason, right? I don't see them why they have to say, well, let me understand. Now, I will tell you, let me go back to the question. I do think, however, that statement, they have to understand the problem space. Right? If you're talking about these things, right, brain dead women and all this, like they need these kids. They need to understand what's happening. They need to understand the conversation, the right to procreative benefits and so on. They need to get the science right. They need to understand what these people are talking about, because there is nuance, and some of this stuff actually might map onto our tradition, right? I mean, I think Prophet's principle is amazing. I didn't even think about that. How can you, but the way they're thinking, this is sophisticated stuff. They're not reading these people. And that's a critique I have with them. I tell them all the time. Right? Like, you can say that I don't need to worry about it, but this is the problem space. You want to be in conversation with bioethics? Read. Be in conversation. And you can say, yes, my tradition has this to say. This is why we reject, Hobbes' view on this and just, but you got to know who they are, what they're thinking. And you must definitely understand that family was going to IVF clinic. That's social scientific data. What they're facing, right? So it's not fully there yet. But again, I don't think that. You get what I'm saying? Like, I think they think that they're doing a great service, and I wouldn't argue with that. Yes.
I have a friend and her daughter married another woman. They're having children now, so they're on their second child, and they're choosing sperm from a Native American donor so that the child can get the benefits of the Native Americans for their higher education.
Wow.
And they're two white women of wealth. And so this is an ethical decision down the line that we're going to have to face, in court soon. But yeah, these are real life things that are going on right now.
Right. Yeah. So society where it's at. Society where it's at. We have to deal with these questions now. Now, in some sense, it's sort of well, we wouldn't worry about that but people are facing these issues, and if you had it, so I'm being recorded, but let's take Islamic bioethics, if it claims to be universal, has to deal with a very plural society, but it's not operating in a plural society right now. It's not even operating in a society, period, right now. But if you're going to say our policies, our laws, our theories, everything has to come together, then yeah, you're not going to decide who will do things, right? And you have to say, well, how do I read that into law, right? You can say that you should have done it, but it's happened. What am I going to do now? So we're still in a theoretical space. There are a couple other hands, yes, sir.
How would Islamic bioethics go about tackling an issue that does not appear in this scripture, Islamic tradition?
Yeah.
Like the issues that arise today probably were not around at the time the Quran was written, so not everything shows up there.
Yeah, the same way I just showed you. So they would take verses, they would try to extrapolate, later on I'll go with this, but they try to extrapolate how does that relate to today, right? So organ donation, they take there's a saying of the Prophet about breaking the bones of the dead is like breaking the bones of a living person. Is that relevance now? There's a saying about not mutilation. There's a saying about saving a life. You would take these scriptural sources and say, okay, well, how do we apply it today? It's not any different from having any scriptural tradition that you sort of say, okay, well, so we do this in the constitutional law. Or what's the spirit of the law? What's the letter of the law? Did this law say that, in Citizens United, that a corporation can be a person? I don't know. I don't think the constitutions are thinking about that. But you got to draw upon principles and hermeneutics, right? To think about how I can relate to that. And you make an argument. So the argument in Islamic bioethics from jurists today is an argument that they're making could change in 5 and 10 years, right? There's people who just disagree.
What I thought was like the verse that you mentioned,
Yes.
who is the mother, who's the
Yes.
father, clearly not taking into account that we would be able to like sometime asexually reproduce. It was not the point of the verse. In no way did they think that.
If you think,
So how can you apply that to today's problem?
right. So the way I like to say, well, the author of that verse is God, who's timeless, and you don't think he knew that we were facing science today. And that's how a Muslim would respond to you, right? That the Quranic revelation, if we believe is from God, and that is time, right? He's outside of time, he creates time, then the revelation is for all time. I have no problem saying that that verse used the words mother, for a certain, being the one that bore you, for our time today. So, other questions, yeah.
So I think you mentioned about them creating confusion. One of the reasons I think that that approach is there because they don't see that whole issue as like some necessary moral crisis or ethical issue that needs to be solved. They feel like something what's not broken doesn't need to be fixed, right? There's a family system, we should just go with that. But like then there's some other issues. For example, the adoption thing that you talked about, like practically adoption as we see it is sort of impermissible. And yet there are like a lot of kids that need homes and all that. What is then, and there's an ethical and moral crisis there as well. What is then their alternative to sort of?
Oh, the adoption is not the problem. So for example, I think the FIC Council of North America, the vice chair of that, her name is Zainab Alwani, who I know. They had a huge meeting in a document called about Islamic adoption, which is called kafala. This notion that, as I said, the social rearing function is not this, right? It's just that you can't say, that's my child to that child. The child has a right to know where it came from. And if there's inheritance from its original parents, it's that child's, right? And here's the thing, that child can marry your own daughter or something, right? So the point is that you want to preserve this lineage so that you don't start making up, oh, you can't marry my daughter. Well, they're not related. Or whatever else it is, right? So you have to follow consistently that lines. But yes, there is a system that preserves those lineal lines, but yet you live in that house and you provide for that child and you treat it as your own and you pay for their college. I mean, what all else that happens? Just that we can't allow you to usurp the parental role as giving them a bequest as, right, these other sort of as marital issues and things like that.
And they're also not mahram to.
That's the issue. That's the point. Mahram means, right, you can't marry, so they can marry, right? So how? And there's ways. So I think that there are ways around that, and without that. But if you adopt a child, and then you're, say, the spouse, the woman, the mother, nurses the child, she's no longer she's mahram now, right? So that issue of gender relations is gone because she's by the act of milk. So there are ways around that as well. And the Shiis have a huge sort of mechanism of how to get around these things, even better than that. So
I'm going to interject. It's 9:30 something right now, and there's clearly like so many other questions that we have. But I'd like to thank you all.
thank you.